The Miami Dolphins stood firm with their one pick on day two of the 2024 NFL Draft, selecting Houston offensive tackle Patrick Paul. We're breaking that selection down here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, the author of Touchdown Miami. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Dolphins your first listen, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network, even if that means 11:15 a.m. on Saturday, April 27th, after day two of the 2024 NFL Draft, after going 5 hours on the live stream on the YouTube channel for Locked On NFL Scouting. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. If you wanted the Dolphins to draft an offensive lineman in the 2024 NFL Draft, here you go. They drafted an offensive lineman. It's probably not the offensive lineman that I would have drafted. And I think the overall strategy of the 2024 NFL Draft is a bit of a hard pill to swallow, if I'm being completely honest, because the Dolphins still have a number of picks on day three. But the Dolphins took these opportunities at 21 overall and at 55 overall, and ultimately drafted players at premium positions with supreme physical upsides, but developmental talents that are going to be your fourth edge rusher and your fourth offensive tackle in 2024. Now, maybe he surpasses Kendall Lamb. But at the same time, there were some other players on the board that I absolutely thought could have been plugged into starting lineup positions for the Dolphins. And those opportunities having come and gone, and for those players to be long-term pieces exclusively. Oh, Chop Robinson, I foresee a pathway to him playing probably 400 or so snaps this season. And with Teron Armstead's health and availability an issue on any given season, we may see some Patrick Paul. We saw 70 snaps of Keon Smith as the fourth tackle last year. And that was with all the injuries that you had. And maybe they're banking on Kendall Lamb not staying healthy for another season to play the second highest snap percentage and snap count of his entire career in year 10. I don't know. But what I do know is my frame of mind coming into these picks for the Dolphins was to find meaningful snap takers with both picks. And the Dolphins did the polar opposite. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, but I will sit here and look you dead in the face and tell you it's not what I would have done. And I do have my apprehensions because of it. Now, when we talked about players I would like and would not like for Miami to draft and players I'd be very concerned about, Patrick Paul's name came up as a player with concern at pick number 21. I did have an early third-round grade on Patrick Paul, I think, in this stage of the draft at 55. He was one of my best offensive tackles available. There's some positional flex. There's obviously long-term developmental upside with him as a player. So, like, a player that I would have been really upset if the Dolphins took at 21, they ended up taking at 55. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier to swallow. But the core ideal and approach of this draft is the polar opposite of what I strategically would have approached this draft with. Case in point, a lot of my player rankings were based on what are these players right now? Not what are these players going to be 3 years from now? What are these players right now in the midst of your winning window to offer you contributions, meaningful contributions for the 2024 campaign and beyond? The Dolphins zigged when I would have zagged. Okay, so I'm not on here to puff my ego. Or I'm not on here to tell you definitively what the right or wrong strategy was. This is a show that I try to make as much as I possibly can about the why of why things happen. So, um, getting off the live stream and having a chance to listen to Patrick Paul's presser and Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel's presser and kind of hear the messaging around the picks, you get a feel for the why, right? And I think this is all the affirmation you need. This is it for Teron Armstead in Miami this year. And we already know this is it for Kendall Lamb. So a little bit of long-term stability at offensive tackle and a little bit of long-term stability where you know you can't afford to pay Shaq Barrett another 1 year, $9 million contract with a bunch of void years on the tail end of it to kick that out. You know, both of these two spots are about long-term stability and talent at premier positions for the roster. Okay. And again, I would like to emphasize this as much as I possibly can. I don't agree with the strategy. I would have not handled the strategy this way. My best available non-cornerback that would have been available at 21 would have been Graham Barton. And then at pick 55, assuming that I would have stayed and picked Graham Barton with the expectation he would have taken a starting role, probably best available player that would have made sense for Miami probably would have been safety Javon Bullard, who went 58 to the Green Bay Packers. That was my best available player at that spot at a position of need. So as I'm cross-referencing positions of need with how I rank and grade the players, and a lot of my rankings and gradings was focused primarily on what are these players' readiness to come in and be meaningful players for you. That's kind of, if you ask me, hey, Kyle, what would you have done at these picks? I'd sit here and I'd probably tell you Graham Barton and Javon Bullard, looking at my board and how the actual picks came off and how it populated, would have probably been where that decision would have gone for me personally. The Dolphins obviously went in a very different direction. And my picks would have been an interior offensive lineman and a safety as D-value positions. So their perspective is that. It's long-term stability with rookie contracts at premier positions with a chance to develop these players, and they might play early and they might not. Okay? Missed opportunity to get your roster better right now. So what that changes for me is the frame of mind for June 1st. This is not go big game shopping anymore. This is, y'all better find 3 or 4 potential meaningful veterans somewhere along the way. And that, to take my own advice from Wednesday, the Hitchhiker's Guide to Surviving the 2024 NFL Draft, could come via a player trade and acquiring a contract for a veteran player at a position where a team has drafted players and may no longer have a use for a player. Okay, that's still very much on the table for something that could happen. I would not expect it. A trade could take place between now and training camp. Trade could take place in training camp. But your shopping list for competing is no shorter today than it was on Wednesday. And I fundamentally disagree with having 2 swings of the bat and not taking either of those opportunities to do that. And that's okay, because it's not about me. It's about the team, and it's about those who are making decisions because they're the ones that are really in this, right? If it doesn't work out, or if I'm wrong and Graham Barton stinks and Javon Bullard is no good, I'll keep doing a podcast and I'll keep trying to learn from those mistakes and getting better. If Patrick Paul and Chop Robinson don't fulfill their potential and the players in front of them leave and the Dolphins suffer the consequences, there's real consequences for those guys, right? And I think we all know that. But for me, the offseason picture is now shifted to your shopping, your free agent shopping here in the next 2-3 months becomes more important, and it becomes deeper. You need to be deeper. And I think the Tua Tagovailoa contract extension for the salary cap space that opens this year looms large, because you're getting significant influx from Xavier Howard. If you get the Tua Tagovailoa contract extension on top of that, suddenly you might be looking at $30 million in cap space. You would need to use probably 2/3 of that, and leave the rest for in-season operating budget. And probably find a number of starters and hope that those markets don't go dry between now and then. And if they do, then you're going to need to tap into 2025 draft capital to acquire somebody off a roster somewhere across the league. So it's not that the roster's not ready to play here and now versus Wednesday. Because I said that on Wednesday. It's not your job to have a roster that's ready to play a football game on May 1st. It's the opportunity cost of how they chose to attack these positions that long term, it very well may play out beautifully for the Dolphins. But as I'm reacting to it and I'm digesting it, and it's the thing for me that I just would not have handled these opportunities this way. Now, we'll talk plenty about Patrick Paul. We're going to talk about who he is as a player. We're going to talk about how the board fell for the Dolphins. All that coming up next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, reacting to the pick at 55 on the 2024 NFL Draft. So stick with us. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to a perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users are not visiting other leading job sites. So if you're not using LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, so why not you? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, blackened mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
So let's talk about Patrick Paul, who has a ton of snaps at his disposal. The last 3 seasons, 2021 played 964 snaps of offensive football. In 2022, played 901 snaps of offensive football. And then in 2023, played 777 snaps of offensive football. This is a monstrous player from a stature and length standpoint, a functional athleticism standpoint. I know those of you who do not like the pick are going to roll your eyes about the talking points, but it's part of painting the picture of who he is. He's 6'7.5", 331 pounds, with an 86 and a 1/4 inch wingspan and 36 and a 1/4 inch arms. That is huge. This is one of the biggest NFL offensive tackles to come through the combine in the last 25 years. A 91st percentile for height, 96th percentile for wingspan, 97th percentile for arm length, 87th percentile for weight. And it comes with an athleticism functionally that is really hard to ignore. When you watch Patrick Paul move, and this is in the run game, particularly in zone blocking, and when you watch Patrick Paul in protection, the movement skills leap off the screen at you. The ability, the hand activity, the foot activity, it's all active. I would argue it's overreactive. And I appreciate hearing him and his media availability talking about working with Duke Manyweather, who is the best. He is the absolute best independent offensive line coach out on the market right now for my money. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Patrick Paul starts working with Duke Manyweather, and the switch did flip for him this past season, where you kind of saw this leap. There was a steady progression the past 3 seasons as far as him being a de facto starter for Houston. The fundamentals are still a mess. I think some of that is playing for Dana Holgorsen at the University of Houston, but nevertheless, it's not going to solve your issue year one. I appreciated the penalties were down, flagged 3 times this past season versus 18 times in 2021 and 2022 combined. The pressures were down. Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer talked about, even with the fundamentals being growth areas for him, and the technique and the hand placement and the timing and the framing with his feet, that all needs a lot of polish. But because he's 6'7", 330 pounds, with a 97th percent, that was a 97th percentile, I'm not sure I get it right, 97th percentile arm length, there is a certain, the phrase that I use to describe it is a gravitational pull, right? Your area of influence, how large is it? How close within your vicinity does a defensive player come and then feel you and have to work around you? He utilizes his length. Now, the punch timing's not always good. His feet aren't always tethered to the ground. The placement's not good. He comes with wide hands too often and gives up his chest, and he's a big body guy. So when that happens, it doesn't look good. And then his feet die, and then he's got to lean and react, and then he gets out of his center of gravity. And there's a lot of growth and development, right, that is required here. But because of the gravitational pull that exists, this is, in my eyes, a player, and they have described this, has a better than expected production profile. And I think that's a case in point when you look at how he grades as a pass protector. He grades very favorably. They played meaningful schools this past year, and it was his best season, right? TCU, West Virginia, Texas, Kansas State, Baylor, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State. Some meaningful programs that they played this season. With all of that said, I do not think from a fundamentals perspective, this is a player who's going to be ready to play in 2024, which is okay for him because he's probably not going to. But it's the big picture versus the small picture, right? And we're going to try to get the full picture. And for me to get the full picture on this draft class, it does require us to get through to see what the roster looks like in training camp and then what else you can add to this roster via trade or free agent acquisition. And if you feel like you're in a competitive window and you want to not rely on rookies, you want to rely on veteran players to do that on one-year deals as veteran contracts with the money that you get post-June 1st, whatever, guys, go and do it. But then go and do it. Because if we still have the same holes and we're rolling into camp and it's like, yeah, Chop's our 4th edge when everybody's healthy, maybe our 5th, depending on if we sign a vet guy to continue to help and give contributions on early downs, and Patrick Paul is your 4th offensive tackle. Ooh, boy, is that going to sting. That's going to sting. He's a really impressive person to hear speak. You can hear the intelligence. He's really well-spoken. He's very deliberate and intellectual. I appreciate that about him. It kind of reminds me of Austin Jackson. And I think Austin Jackson's a great name to invoke. I actually have Patrick Paul. I do have him graded higher than what I had Austin Jackson graded coming out of USC. I had an early 3 on Patrick Paul. They got him towards the tail end, the last 10 picks of the 2nd round. I'm okay with the value. Again, it's the whole picture for both of these choices combined that really chaps my rear end. But again, I'm trying not to make it about what I would have done, and we're exploring the who, the what, the why of this player and this strategy here and the implications of it as we come out the other end of these meaningful investments, because Miami did not add any extra draft capital on day 2. We'll see if they can rub a few picks together and find something in the first couple picks because there's somebody who's sitting on the board overnight before things start at noon tomorrow. I guess today, because it's technically Saturday. But you are encouraged by the growth of this player, and this scheme has brought out from raw offensive linemen a little bit more consistent play. I think the floor as a pass protector is probably higher because of the freakishness of the size that he has. So I see the pathway for Patrick Paul to be a successful NFL player, a successful NFL starting tackle. And because this is a player you drafted in the second round at 55, as compared to this would have been the face of your draft class at 21, I process the pick in a vacuum a lot cleaner and a lot easier. To compare and contrast Austin Jackson, Austin was 6'5", so he's 2.5 inches shorter than Patrick Paul. He was 322 pounds coming out. I'm not quite sure what his playing weight is now, but that was 78th percentile. It's 10 pounds lighter than Patrick Paul, and an arm length of 34 inches, which is 2 1/8 inches shorter than Patrick Paul. So Patrick Paul is like proportionately larger than Austin Jackson, and every bit the same functional athlete. So if I isolate Patrick Paul as a second round pick versus the valuation as one of the best tackles I had available at that stage in the draft, it's a premium position. Okay, I got it. I see it. But again, this strategy, it changes the outlook of the rest of the offseason for me. And there is a long-term reaping and reward that can be there for the Dolphins. But it puts a lot more stress on what you do the rest of the offseason to circumvent it. And it will not calm down the narrative and the discussion around using premium draft picks on players who are not playing, unless guys like Cam Smith and Eric Ezukama. And would Channing Tindall step up? What would the role be there? I think if you got Ezukama and Cam Smith in year 2 and year 3 in this system, and they became prominent contributors in some capacity, I think that would probably calm it a little bit, and there would be a little bit more trust from everybody on the outside looking in. Because right now, it's kind of the proof of concept. It's like the Christian Wilkins leaving in free agency thing. Nobody believes the Dolphins are going to extend Jalen Waddle. Everybody's freaking out about all these wide receiver contracts that are getting done because it's like, oh, the price is going to go up. The same thing's going to happen with Jalen Waddle that happened with Christian Wilkins. They're not going to afford him, and he's going to leave. I have no doubt that contract's going to get done. But everybody's super gun shy and scattershot because a similar story played out with a different player at a different position, and he became a top 5 paid player in the NFL and left. So that's how things fell. We will talk a little bit more about the messaging about this pick individually. Patrick Paul, talk a little bit more about his background and shift our focus from there here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. We've all been there as a player or a fan. It's halftime. The scoreboard's not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure if your team can pull out the dub. That's when you dig deep, lift up your head and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. With Smash Hit, mobile hit game, Monopoly Go, you can compete with your friends to get the most riches in the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do, like play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, charge other players rent on your iconic properties, and more. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go now free in the App Store or Google Play. So let's talk a little bit about the board as it's left for Miami. Not that there's a pick imminent or scheduled to be imminent right now. But on the heels of this pick, I would just like to outline a couple of players. I have 4 players that I had second-round grades on specifically for Miami. I think if you put it on the curve of how the Dolphins have drafted those players, Miami has kind of been just a tick and touch off because, again, my focus was 2024 value. Their focus is long-term value. And the merits of that is not really there's just a fundamental divide there. But Theo Johnson, the Penn State tight end, I think would be a good long-term play, but I think has some different roles that could be contributing roles now if he gets to you in the 5th round or if you get an earlier pick. Kitano Ladapo from Oregon State, Brandon Dorlus from Oregon. Kind of different backgrounds. The older players, but playing at Oregon and Oregon State and Penn State, and it's maybe a little bit of a different developmental curve than an air raid small school offensive tackle that moved up to the Big 12 this past year. And then TJ Tampa, the corner from Iowa State. I don't know the corner I'm particularly interested in using a pick on in this stage, but a good player who's left out there. I do think there's some role players that are available on day 3. We've entered into the stratosphere where I think drafting Jatavian Sanders would be a plus value. I also like Jaheim Bell at tight end from Florida State. I like Jaheim Bell better than Jatavian Sanders, but like if the Dolphins found a way to make either one of those picks at this point in time, you say, yeah, that's plus value where I had those guys graded. Where I thought Chop Robinson was a little early, but that's again because I was grading him on the year 1 role, not the 3-year forecast, in the same way that Patrick Paul was a touch early, not as early as what I thought Chop Robinson was relative to how I had him graded. But again, it was because I'm not looking long-term. I'm looking, you'll be finding starters this year or not. And they don't care about that, whether that's right or wrong. They will find presumably starters elsewhere. And if they don't, they better hope player development happens on a large scale for a lot of players. And that is not a bet that I would be willing to place. Because you had some big leaps already, and player development is not linear, and it's not guaranteed to be exponential. At safety, we mentioned Oladapo. Dadrian Taylor-Demerson is still out there. Tight ends, also Jared Wiley from TCU would shout him out as well. Wide receiver Malik Washington from Virginia. Pass rusher Mohamed Kamara, although you just used to pick on a pass rusher, would you go for another one? Would you want another rookie anyway? I don't have a good answer there. Safety Malik Mufasta from Wake Forest, Jaden Hicks from Washington State. Offensive line, I had some apprehensions about Mason McCormick from South Dakota State, but I had him graded as a 4th round grade. So like if he's on the board for you when you come back around, even if I do think he's a bit more of a better gap player than he is a zone player, I would not be upset with that at all when you come around to the 5th round. Same for Hunter Norzad from Penn State if you want more competition there. I do wonder what this pick means for Keon Smith. Keon Smith has shown in the preseason as a player who's been trying to find his footing, some ability to play at guard. Would that mean he could be invoked in the guard competition? I still think you need at least one starter there. I'm not overly surprised that Liam Eichenberg's getting a chance to compete for a starting spot when you consider he's on the books for $4.5 million a year in a contract this year, thanks to some playing time incentives for player compensation from the NFLPA. Not super surprised there. Not super surprised that Isaiah Wynn is going to get a look, but the writing's on the wall there. So is this the year you're going to be more flexible with Kendall Lamb? If so, okay, I'll hear you out. Can Keon Smith move? How confident are you that he would play inside of the high level in pass protection? I don't know. We'll find out what happens with the picks. The nice thing is, one of the nice things I should say, is I do think Mason McCormick's still out there. Does he get to the 5th round because he played at South Dakota State? I don't know. Does Hunter Norzad from Penn State get there? Does Bo Limmer from Arkansas or Tanner Bortolini make it? Does Christian Mahogany make it? You didn't really have a big-time run on interior offensive linemen until late. And I think that's not a coincidence because teams spent a lot on free agent interior offensive linemen. So I think there's a decent chance there is an interior offensive lineman that they could draft for need. That would be a player that we had graded as like a 4th-round pick. I mean, the 4th-round guys that I have still available are McCormick, Norzad, Bo Limmer, Tanner Bortolini, and Trevor Keegan from Michigan. As far as what I have for the rest of the board in general, just looking ahead from here, we acknowledged Johnson, Dorless, Tampa, and Oladapo as the player positions where there's like a higher value that I thought could be a meaningful player in 2024. Tight end has some depth. We did not get a lot of tight end action. We had Brock Bowers, Ben Sinnott, and Tip Ryman came off the board. That's a big surprise. He was a top 100 pick, but the inline blocking stuff's huge for him. I think wide receiver has a lot of attractive options, but I have 1 3rd-round grade in Malik Washington, and the rest of it's day 3 grades and like Tez Walker and Troy Franklin and Javon Baker. I know I was lower on consensus than those guys, but here they are. Brennan Rice from USC, big physical guy, and Anaya Smith, kind of a schemed touch potential type of guy, could compete with River Craycraft for a spot on the 53 potentially. Jacob Cowing, Jamari Thrash, Jordan Whittington. Like there's wide receivers that I like. I think you're going to have a crack at least one of those guys. I think there's enough interior offensive line that I could see you having a crack at one of those guys. Again, unless you dig deep and somewhere find another pick early on day 3. And then safety, there's some decent Oladapo, Taylor Demerson, Jaden Hicks, Malik Mustafa. That's kind of it for guys that I think could be meaningful safeties for you somewhat early. So you still have a couple guys. I think you're going to get a chance to add a player that's could potentially make a 53-man roster and be a contributing player for you in some capacity, but not the high volume snap takers that we were kind of resided to hoping to find when we set off on this draft. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day, even if it's 1 a.m. on a Saturday. The NFL draft, it's a gift that keeps on giving, even when the team goes the complete opposite direction of what you strategically would have hoped to accomplish coming in. But that's why they're paid the big bucks. And we'll see what happens from here. We'll see how they manage to play the board on day 3. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. We will react to all of the Dolphins pick the next time we talk. So I hope to see you soon.